Thank you. So yeah, I'm taking a class in Old Testament theology over at the seminary, and I have to do a Bible study to a group of people. So I called up Nancy, hey, can I come and share at Divine Divas? And part of the requirements is I have to videotape myself giving it. I'm not sure if it's just to prove that I did it or if someone looks at it. I don't know. I've had this teacher before in a different class, and I've had to do like 3 or 4 of these things, so I'm kind of used to it, but I'm also not. Who actually likes being in front of a camera, right? Not me.
I have a granddaughter.
So is it recording?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It says REC. I call that recording.
Yeah. Cool. So a little bit about me. Those of you who don't know me, my name's Connie again. Hi. I think I know most of you. So I've worked in ministry for probably about 25 years. 20 of the years we're working with children at 2 or 3 different churches, and then the last 4 years have been working at Loma Vista, where a lot of you know me from, as an associate pastor there, and now I'm at, I just looked at the church. Where am I? North Fresno Mennonite Brethren Church, and that's been just a new change, like the last 6 weeks, so I'm brand new at a new church. Which has been interesting, being used to a whole new culture and all these new people and names, and so it's been a unique time of just observing, trying to figure out how things work, and but it's been fun. So while I've been working on all these life changes, I'm still going to school. I am in my 3rd year at the seminary working on my Master's of Divinity. So this class, this Bible study is based in the story of Tamar and Judah. I'm someone who loves my Old Testament. I'm on my 4th semester of Greek at the seminary, and I'm taking Greek because I don't like Paul. And so my attempt is to learn to read Greek so that I can make sense of what he's actually saying. But I love the stories in the Old Testament. So I like both places. So what I love about the Old Testament is I like to find those obscure women who tend to be passed over in a lot of our, church sermons and whatever, or even a curriculum. So I like to look for the random ladies who I think have fascinating stories, oftentimes very interesting pasts, and usually go about their story in a unique way. And so one of these gals is Tamar. She's one of my faves. So we had to pick a theological topic and then base it in a story, and that was our kind of assignment for this. And so I chose the topic of righteousness, based in the story of Tamar and Judah that we'll be reading shortly here. And it's kind of a long text, and it's really interesting because it's right in the middle of the story of Joseph, which is why it gets kind of passed over. Because you read about Joseph, you have the whole musical, and everybody knows the story of Joseph and the brothers and sold into slavery and Potiphar and blah, blah, blah. But right in the middle of there's this chapter 38 on Judah and Tamar. So usually when you read it, if you're doing a sermon series, you just skip 38 because it doesn't really pertain to Joseph. So people don't typically read it. But here it is, a really big story about this woman, Tamar, and Judah, who of course is one of the tribes of Israel, and actually the tribe where Jesus himself comes from eventually. So Tamar is actually a pretty key character in Jesus' genealogy. So it is important to stop and look at this little story found in Genesis 38. So this was written before the law was given. And I was telling Nancy, I think it's a story that we don't usually study because there's a lot of sexuality in it and it makes us uncomfortable, so we just don't want to read it. But we're going to take those lenses off and then stand back and not judge it based on, well, that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong, but figure out why are these things happening? Why is her plan of attack in this method? And what's happening with Judah? And really look at it, strategically, I guess, and not get caught up in the emotions of, I can't believe she would do that. But look at why do you think she went to that course of action, and was that the only method she could do to get out of where she was? But anyway, so it's going to be a fun story. I love this story. Okay, so turn your Bibles. I'm a Bible person, so I hope you all brought your Bibles. Nancy!
I brought nothing. I just brought me. That's okay. I can share with Linda here.
You want me to get you a Bible?
No, I just share.
So
I like to listen aloud when people are reading anyway, so.
So we're going to turn to Genesis 38. And as you can see, it's
I
right
did
in
think
the-
about bringing the Bible though to my
You have
son.
your phone.
And I deleted it. My judgment was,
You don't have your phone. either?
I do, but I'm like, I gotta get a Bible on my phone. And so my new phone, my old phone didn't have enough storage for a Bible. This one does. I haven't done it. I realized I've been needing to do that. Okay, go ahead, Connie. Sorry.
So as we read, we're going to be filling out the, I gave you the grid between comparing the actions of Tamar to the actions of Judah. And just kind of writing down a few notes as we're reading, because once we read through the text, then we're going to go back and ask some questions and kind of pick it apart a little bit more. So it's mostly just to help you remind yourself as to what's happening within each of those chunks of scripture, so that when we come back and talk about it, kind of gives you a square to land in, and hopefully you can remember what the story was about in that little square. And I could write it up there, or you can just write it yourself. Or if you want to just auditorily listen, you don't have to write. It's just an optional activity. So what we're going to do first is we're going to read chapter 38, verses 1 through 5. Are you guys a group that likes to read aloud? Or
Yeah, we all do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a question I've never asked.
I don't ever want to assume of someone who, maybe doesn't feel comfortable reading. So if we're all comfortable reading, then I'm just going to assign or kind of go around robin and start. It's a long
never
chapter.
asked that
Ask if we're
question.
comfortable.
I didn't. It never crossed my mind. That was nice as Connie.
But it is a big chapter, so we're going to read it and then talk. So, Lori, do you want to read verses 1 through 5?
It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain
You get the fun one.
Bilamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and went in to her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. He was at Shezib when she bore him.
Okay, so we have Judah, and has left his family and come down to this part of the world, down here in a certain area of Canaan. And he's married a woman who's not an Israelite, and her name is, whatever it is,
Hira.
Shua. Right, his name is Shua. And she bore him how many sons?
3.
3 sons. Great names, Onan, and you said Shelah. I kept calling him Sheila. But who knows how you say it.
Masculine.
So she bore him 3 sons. So if you want to write down, Judah leaves his family. Judah, he sees a woman and takes her as his own. And then, of course, that term went into her. We know that implies that he's had relations with her, so she conceives and bears 3 sons. Okay, so now we have verses 6 through 11. Gets more exciting.
Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death. Ooh. Then Judah said to Onan, "Lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. What was that?
That's the traditions. Go ahead.
So whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from producing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in Lord's sight, so he put him to death. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house.
Okay, so I need someone to read. We're going to go and look at a law in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5 through 6. And this is going to give us a little bit of background as to why Judah gave Tamar his second son.
25 what?
25, verse 5 through 6.
If brothers are living together, one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brothers shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel.
Okay. So the reason that they have this law is so that the man who has passed away, his lineage, his line will continue. He doesn't just cease from existing as far as that goes. So it would technically be his son, but the son would bear his brother's name, which is why Onan's like, I don't want that, I'm going to have a son, I want it to be my son, which is why he spills his seed, and the Lord does not approve of that. And of course, this is in Genesis, before the laws given to Moses, so we're looking at a text that was actually, a lot of scholars believe, written, after the time of Moses and stuff. So they're telling the story through the lens of the law, but yet it's not, we can't also put judgment on them saying you have to abide by the law because it hasn't yet been given. Does that make sense? So the person writing Genesis knows of the law that's coming, but yet in Genesis it hasn't actually been established. So we're kind of looking at it in kind of two-dimensionally. So that's the law. It's the Levirate law of if the firstborn son dies, you give the wife, the widow, to the secondborn to keep the first son's genealogy going. And of course, God strikes the second son down as well. So we have both boys have been killed by God. And I think it's interesting to look at, like I wrote down for Tamar, that Tamar is given to so she's been taken from her family and given to the oldest son, and then he dies. So then she's given to Onan, and then he dies. And then she's not given to Shelah and is sent back to her household. So it's interesting to me to look at all of the actions are done to Tamar. She's a recipient of the action, not taking action herself. And all the action being done to her is not necessarily kind or just. Yeah. And for, of course, Judah, he chooses Tamar for and all of his two sons are evil. It's kind of unique. I'm like, what does that say about, what's that saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree? You're like, what's going on in Judah's life that he's raised two sons that both get struck dead because they're evil? We're not sure what...
He never connects that to himself.
No, he doesn't. Do we ever as parents connect that to wasn't me? And then you also see in verse 11 that Judah is legitimately afraid to give Tamar to Shelah, because his two other sons have died. He only has one more. So is he going to just, I think because of his fear of losing his own genealogy, he's like, forget it. Go ahead, Tamar, go back to your household and remain a widow, and I'll give you this son once you're old enough. But as we find out in the next verse, that never happens. So he's out of fear. He's not kind of fulfilling his promise to Tamar according to this law, giving her the next son or next kin that's available. And even if you know Ruth's story, a few books later, that's what happened with her, was looking for that kinsman redeemer who would, redeem her and redeem that line also.
Was she also Canaanite?
Tamar, it doesn't say that she's not, so I don't really know. Yeah. Interesting, huh? Okay, so what happens to poor Tamar? Okay, so now we're going to get really dicey. It's very exciting. Verses 12 through 14.
After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that, though Shelah had not grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife.
Okay, that's good. All right, so my Bible says after a considerable time, and my other version says the days became many. So we know that some time has passed between her going back to her household and this event occurring. Enough time that she's realizing, I'm never going to be given that third son. What am I going to do about it? So now we have Judah, who his wife of the 3 sons has passed away. And he does his 7 days of grieving, and then after the grieving's over, he goes up with a friend to shear some sheep, which it doesn't say what that involves, but there's a whole bunch of men together shearing sheep, and some of the commentaries I read said, just time to get together for a bunch of men do men things, which are sometimes interesting to women, and Tamar hears about it, says, hey, your father-in-law is going up to shear sheep. I guess all the women know, we know what that means. So she takes off her widow's garments, which to me is fascinating. It means that this whole time she is identified as a widow. So we don't know how much time has passed, but this entire time she is visually still in a state of mourning. And I've thought about, dressing as a widow for that long in a grief kind of look. Do you eventually just grieve almost your life? The husbands, they were so short-lived. I don't know how much of a relational connection she had with those two. But the fact that she's realizing this is now my identity forever, I think there's a lot of grief that she's identifying with and becoming part of her identity. And so her next action, I think, is great because she decides not to stay in this identity that this man has put her into, and she decides to take action, and kind of get her own justice. So, now it gets even more fun. Any questions yet with what's going on?
Was it common in those days that once you were a widow, you remained a widow all your life? In that black card, you didn't have any way out, did you?
I don't know. I don't think so, unless... I don't know. I know in Jesus' day that was one of the topics of conversation. Whose wife is she if the husband died and she remarried? So there must have been some remarriage that would go on.
Right, but unless you remarried,
yeah.
you were pretty without resources.
Which is why the Bible, we're going to look at a few verses where, caring for the widow and the orphan is extremely important. I think we don't do a good enough job. We leave it to social services or whatever and don't really take the Bible seriously because you're right, so many times they were without resources once they're a widow. So who's going to care for them? And it is the job of the righteous, the wealthy, to be looking after the widow. So then you start to see, so here's Judah, a man of wealth and power and sons and property, and he's put Tamar in a corner and said, stay there as a widow. Is he really fulfilling righteousness? Is he being righteous in that act? Or is he breaking down that relationship and not fulfilling his part of what he's supposed to do as a righteous man? So, which is kind of the underlying part of the story.
But originally, wasn't he trying by giving the second son her sleep with? Because they didn't have a child. If the child's male, the child would grow up to maybe support the mother. Is that why they do that?
Say that again?
He marries the second. She marries.
Yes.
No, doesn't. She's not married the second son, but she sleeps with him. Hopefully, they have a child. The child, hopefully, is a male. Grows up and then maybe provides for the mother. Is that why they do that too?
Probably to care for the mom. Yeah.
Keep it in the family.
Yeah, to keep the name going and to care for Tamar.
But the second child wouldn't be her son in name.
No, and if she were to
Just
have
the first
and I
child.
think if she were to have 2 sons with the second brother, the first son would be Er's and the second son would be Onan's.
Okay, so then if she marries the second son, that was still to keep her husband's line?
Yeah, the first
Going?
son is to keep the line going.
Right.
The second son is to keep the
The
Onan
hus-
line going.
Okay.
I think stay single.
Just get complicated.
Yeah.
And then when Judah sees, okay, 2 of my kids are dead that I married off to her.
You can
I'm not
kind of-
doing this again.
You can kind of feel for him, like he's not a total
wow.
jerk not giving his third son.
Let's
But yet you also see it's not Tamar's fault. These 2 men were
No.
legitimately evil. She didn't poison them. God struck them down. So she's also in a spot where it's being done to her. It's not her fault, but yet. And I thought, if I was living in this community and did you hear about Tamar? Another one of her husbands is dead. I mean, what kind of blight would you, I'm sure the
Black
Black
widow.
Black widow.
So, what she's carrying for years possibly is, this widow look and everyone knowing, gosh, she's killed 2 sons. I mean, they don't know what the situation's.
But she also married into not a really good family. You kind of, I was sure glad when my husband died that wasn't continued, because I thought, I wouldn't choose his brother for my husband.
Yes.
You know, it's like, oh, you gotta look and see who you're marrying into.
But maybe Judah was keeping Tamar around just to take care of him because now his wife's gone. So,
Well, she's at her father's household
Yeah.
now.
oh,
So she's
yeah.
living with her
Oh,
dad.
okay.
And in a sense, you almost have this feeling of she's kind of on reserve just in case he wants to give her, like,
Backup plan.
so she's not really free to remarry or live her life because she needs to stay in her widow look just in case he decides to give her to Shayla. So there's kind of this, like, her life's on hold while he's trying to decide what's convenient for him, which isn't the best way for a righteous man to treat a widow. Yeah. Let's see what else. Okay, so now we're gonna get to the more exciting parts.
15,
So she
19.
goes up to this place and she gets out of her clothing, puts on, covers herself with a veil, wraps herself, so he doesn't recognize her. He doesn't know that it is Tamar. So now we're going to read 15 through 19.
When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again.
Okay, so what a feisty little thing. And it's great to think she's in the lineage of Jesus. I just love that.
Whenever we have doubts,
There's some
look
great
at
characters in Jesus' genealogy. So she takes off her widow's garb, puts on this thing, and he just assumes, oh, look at, here's a,
Oh, that's fine.
okay, I'm like, what does that sound? Here's a prostitute, and he's going to go and talk to her. And you see this really nice civil business exchange. Okay, well, what are you going to pay me? Well, I'll give you a sheep. Okay, well, I need some pledge that you're going to follow through with your word. Well, I'll give you this stuff, which is funny because the things that he gives her, his seal, his cord, and his staff, are all very, they're markers of his identity. Like, nobody else has a staff like his. His seal is unique to him. So it definitely is something that identifies him as being the one who's having this interaction with her. But in his haste, I mean, he could have given her, I don't know what else would be simple, but she's purposely asking for these things knowing that she can prove who this is. So she's very witty and smart in her business relation with Judah
And she
here.
kept her veil on, so he didn't recognize
Yeah,
her.
so
But
he
what's
never
interesting
knew.
is he doesn't recognize her voice.
Yeah, true.
Shows how
Well,
the
this
voice
is quite a few years later. Maybe she's changed.
Yeah.
Our voices
He
do
hasn't
change
seen her
from...
for a while.
Grown up.
Well, and all the past we've seen of Tamar is she's very passive. She just takes it. She just takes it. So I don't think he would ever think that.
She would be that conniving
would-
or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot. I was gonna have you look in verse 14, to look at how different. Look at how many verbs are in verse 14. Considering the fact that she's been so passive up to this point, when she hears that he's gone to shear the sheep, she removes her widow's garment, she covers herself, she wraps herself, and then she sits. So there's like 5 verbs in a row where all the rest she hasn't been doing anything. So she definitely is taking action and going to try to make this relationship right, make right of what's been wronged in her life. So yeah, so they have this business exchange. And then the deed is done, he departs, she puts back on her garments of mourning, and no one knows. It's interesting that he has like 7 days to grieve for his wife and is already off to do the next thing, and yet she's supposed to be happy being a widow forever and not have any drive or impulses, and you just remain a widow. But me, myself, I'm a man, and I just have these urges, and hey, come on over here.
But isn't that
So
more
that-
cultural in those days? I mean, come on.
It is.
Women didn't have these like options to
No.
say, I don't like this. I'm going to
But
go
there's
with this.
definitely that, you see the what do you call it? It's not fair,
Inequality.
of the men and women.
Certainly,
What's
that's word our day.
was allowed.
Well, that's why Jesus had to come, right? To break down the walls, bring us equality, right?
What are the
Isn't
reasons?
that what Jesus did?
Yeah, yeah.
Amongst all people.
So, and then of course, now we have this funny thing where Judah sends the kid over to her, and we have verse 20 through 23. See what happens.
And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adulamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand. But he did not find her. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, "Where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside?" And they said, "There was no harlot in this place." So he returned to Judah and said, "I cannot find her." Also the men of the place, I asked the men of the place, and they said, "No harlot is in here." Then Judah said, "Let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed. For I sent this young goat, and you have not found her."
So interesting, Judah doesn't go himself. He sends his friend to deliver the goat and to bring back his pledge items. And my Bible, I don't know what yours, Bev, you had harlot. My Bible up in verse 15 identifies her as a harlot, but then in verses 20 and 21, or 21 and 22, my Bible calls her a temple prostitute.
Mine says cult prostitute.
Yeah. Which
My,
would be just
yeah,
a
my
religious-
footnote
Yeah,
says
sure.
harlot translates a Hebrew term that literally means holy woman, refers to a sacred or cultic prostitute.
Yeah. So we
Well, there's a
have,
different world there.
so we have his interactions with her at the beginning is just some harlot on the side of the road. But when he goes to deliver the sheep, he's identifying her as a cult, a religious prostitute. Almost as if, it's just customary. It's not like a quick fix on the side of the road, but this is just what we do in our culture. So it's a little more approved, but yet then the men in the area say, well, there's never been a whatever it's called, temple prostitute here. And so now he's a little dumbfounded and doesn't know what to do about it. So, well, let's just not tell anybody we don't want to be a mockery of our society, so let's just let her keep the things. I don't care. Kind of interesting, huh? So is she a harlot? Did she act like a temple prostitute? I'm not sure which term best identifies her, but anyways, kind of interesting that they use two terms to
But
talk
would
about her.
one-
Mine says,
Go ahead.
mine reads shrine prostitute.
Yeah,
Yeah,
shrine
mine says-
prostitute.
It's
So
almost
that
like
give
they
her a little bit more
Well, yeah,
okay to
yeah.
go into
It's
her?
more okay
It's
than-
almost
yeah.
like they provide this because they know the men are going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So they provide this special harlot to do this, making it all. I mean, I don't know. That's how I read it.
And
To
you
me,
might
it's
say
like,
They had a higher social status.
because they're like hired. They're like hired help instead of the,
Spiritual.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
It would make sense. They're like
Yeah.
there to serve
Yeah.
the people.
So
of
it's
the
not as
area.
negative as
Yeah.
harlot when you see the temple prostitute.
Because you're really poor and you're doing it because you have to. This is a job.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's just
I
cultural.
know, right?
Of course, we can't put ourselves there. It's easy to go, what is that problem? But we have to stand back and go, okay, this is just the culture. So he does not find her, and he says, just let that woman keep this stuff. I don't care. And then, of course, dun dun dun, 3 months later. So verses 24 through 26. Sharon's turn.
About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has been acting like a prostitute, and now she is pregnant." "Bring her out," Judah said. "Let her be burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent her father-in-law this message: "I am pregnant by the man to whom these items belong." And she added, "Examine them. Whose signet ring, cord, and staff are these?" Judah recognized them and said, "She is more in the right than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." And he did not know her intimately again.
Isn't that awesome? I just love this story. So she's 3 months pregnant, so she's beginning to show, of course, and the word gets out. Oh my gosh, this woman has been acting like a prostitute. The word goes to Judah, and he says, "Burn her," which is interesting because, let's see, I have my notes somewhere. Usually for prostitutes, you stone a prostitute, but you burn like a priest's daughter who's acting like a prostitute. So one of the commentaries questioned perhaps her lineage is actually a priestly lineage, So they wanted to burn her because she was more in the lineage of a priest. Who knows? I'm not sure why he didn't say let's stone her, but why he chose to burn her, I'm not sure. They think probably it's because her lineage is more of a priestly lineage. It was an interesting thought. But it doesn't say that, but just by his actions against her, that's a possibility. And then I love that she doesn't just stand up and say, hey, wait, I have these things, but she sends them to Judah. So nobody else actually sees it. So it's kind of up to him as to if he's going to confess. He
could steal them.
He doesn't have to say anything. He could just take him, hide him, and say, burn her, and the deed is done, and nobody knows. So it's interesting that she chose to do this in secret, almost kind of knowing that he really is a good guy. He just
He has some kind of honor anyway.
Yeah, he must have some honor in him that she's going to just trust that and hope and pray that he's going to follow up on his relationship and fulfill his relationship of recognizing it was him and confessing that. So I think that's interesting because she could have just shamed him in front of the whole community, and she didn't do that, which I think shows a lot of character for her. And of course he recognizes it and is like, oh, tables have been turned. And then she says this line, which is why I chose my topic of righteousness. He says, she is more righteous than I, inasmuch I did not give her to my son Shelah. So her righteousness, I love that term because she's acting as a prostitute. She disguises herself. She has relations with Judah on this road to shear his sheep, but yet her actions are more righteous than Judah's. And I think I love that because it shows that God's not looking at our lives based on what rules we're following, but how are we in our relationships to one another? Are we valuing our community? Are we valuing people more than these laws? Or are laws all for the end all be all for us? I think we look at the New Testament and all of Jesus' statements of you've heard it said that you shall not murder, but I tell you, you shall not hate your brother. So we begin to see even in the Old Testament, God isn't just about following rules. Because following rules is one thing, but honoring relationship keeping and being someone who maybe jumps like Tamar had to step outside of her rules and do things that were not necessarily appropriate, definitely unconventional, in order to kind of reclaim her life and to get her justice because Judah wasn't offering it. Which is why her righteousness is greater because Judah had faltered with his righteousness because he had chosen not to, give her his third son. So it's just very interesting that her righteousness is better, weightier, even though she's done all these crazy things. But I think what I've learned in my last few, weeks of studying this topic is that relationship. I think on the top of righteousness is about relationship. It's about being in right relationship with one another. So the fact that Judah put Tamar in a corner and left her there was a breakdown of righteousness, which is why her righteousness is greater, because she's actually, I wrote this down, it's kind of fun. It's Tamar, not Judah the patriarch, who is ultimately responsible for the survival of the descendants of the house of Judah. Because through her, she has two sons, and her son, Perez, is who continues the lineage to Jesus Christ. So if she didn't actually take action, we don't know for sure, but we don't see any other sign of Shelah and his work in the Bible. It just goes from Perez forward. So ultimately, it's her action that continues and fulfills God's plan of Jesus Christ, which is just fascinating. Yeah.
I wonder if God talked to her and told her that he died. Well, that happened a lot, right?
Yeah.
God came down and talked to people in different ways in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, because who thinks this up?
And she said, what?
Take
Take
off
off
my
my
clothes.
No, it's very, very bad. I think there's a law later on in Deuteronomy that says, in fact, in Deuteronomy and in Hosea, everything that they did here is bad. It's not saying, hey, go and sleep with whoever.
Even though his wife died, he shouldn't sleep with the dog.
No. No.
But a
Um,
prostitute's okay?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
And then the
temple
prostitute can get
prostitute.
stoned
temple
or burned, but
prostitute.
not the guy that
Yeah, well.
untriggered.
There's a lot of well, and that's why this story is hard to read because we get so affronted by the difference in culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to like hear, okay, what is going on here? What's the important part of the story that we do need to pull out and kind of redeem so we don't just throw it out and skip it over and just read the Joseph story? Because there is something here. Because even Judah himself, I mean, later on, even in the story of Joseph, he's the one who at the end of Joseph says, just, let me stay here because they're going to send... Joseph says, one of you has to stay because I want you to go back and get my father,
Yeah, but
My little brother.
my little brother. He doesn't know who he is yet. But Judah is who says, kind of sacrifices himself. So you know what, I'll remain here so that all of you can go back. So there is, from Judah at the beginning of the Joseph story, who says, hey, let's throw this kid in the pit, to the Judah we see at the end of Joseph, there's a lot of character development that's happened here. And I think a lot of that happens in chapter 38 with Tamar, because he's recognized that his job as a righteous patriarch, a leader in his community, is to advocate the role, the person, the widow, the orphan, to take care of them, not put them off to the side and forget about them. So he's recognized in all this that, oh gosh, I haven't done what I'm supposed to do. Her righteousness is greater than mine because I'm not fulfilling my relationship with her. And my, oath to her of giving her my third son.
Which is kind of shocking because the natural inclination is to blame someone else. In this situation, Judah didn't blame her.
No.
Which I'm just thinking a lot of people, culturally, especially culturally, in those days, not only today.
And it's
like,
huge. She's pregnant. Not like,
right? It's like she tricked, I could just see it going, well, look at even the very beginning of the Bible. She made me eat the apple. She made me, right? It's shocking that Judah introspectively went in and said, oh my, looked at himself and said,
Yes.
where's my role in this?
yeah. So,
Because culturally, it'd be the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It's even today.
so that's
She
huge. You see
tricked me.
a big character development in
Yeah,
him
that's
in
huge.
this recognizing of she's great, her righteousness is greater, and I'm confessing now that, yep, this is my stuff.
But could it be also that, because he did okay, gave a second son to her, but when he died, he's thinking about himself, he only has one son left. So it's kind of like us. We're trying to do the right thing, but then we see the circumstances, and then we take the control. But in his heart, when she confronts him, he says, you're more righteous. So to me, in his heart, he's still listening to God. He's just
Yeah.
trying to take control of what
Yeah.
he can.
Because
to
of
make things
fear.
work out.
Because of,
Yeah,
Because he's
fear,
human.
worrying.
Kind of like many of us would have done. Yeah.
I relate to him.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of instances in the Old Testament of stories where they fall short of doing what God wants them to do. And I think it's only Jesus who completes completely what his call is. I think most of the stories have that element of, oh, we didn't quite make it. Our righteousness falls short.
Do you think that, and this is something I've always thought, that the Old Testament's one of the reasons we have it is to show us how we need the grace of God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's you need that part of the story
Yeah.
to remind you that we need God's grace, we need Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Because even the men that were righteous, the women that were righteous back then,
Yeah.
couldn't
All fall
fulfill.
short of the glory of God.
Yeah, they couldn't
Right.
fulfill the law. They
Yeah.
couldn't
Exactly,
do it. Our
no.
humanness always gets in the way. So I've always felt that was the purpose of us having the Old Testament, was to
Mhm.
remind us that we needed grace
Yeah.
and that we needed Christ.
Yeah, I'd agree. Because that's huge, and so many stories talk about that or reveal that kind of shortcoming
Right,
of humanity that we can't, in our own power.
We can't do it.
We can't. Even Judah, who's Lion of Judah, he's
Yeah.
like the main
Yeah.
guy, and he falls short. So that's our fun story. My paper is called Beyond Rule Following because I think relationship, the Hebrew word is sadak, and righteousness is sadak. And it's not just following rules, but redeeming relationships, making sure that we have shalom one to another beyond following rules. If I come to a signal and it's red and I stop and I see a car coming this way and my signal turns to green, I'm in the right to go forward because the light's green.
Yeah.
But I also know that guy's gonna run the light, so if I go forward, I'm gonna be hit. So, following rules, to me, and I'm not saying don't follow rules, but, they're guidelines to relationships. There's a family that I know that value rules over relationships, and you have to follow rules, follow rules, follow rules, but then they've lost a bunch of their kids to whatever because they haven't engaged in enough relationships. So there's this tension between rule following, but making sure you're still reconciled to one another, and you're loving your kids, loving your parents, whatever the situation is, and honoring the relationship even over the rules itself, which is why we get to Jesus and the Beatitudes, and he kind of, blows all the rules up and says, hey, love God and love one another. It comes down to those two things. If you're not doing those two things, I don't care what rules you're following. If you're not doing those, that's all that really matters. What do you do next?
Prayer card at 10.
But to be, this is just a side thing, but to be biblically based, because this is where some of my friends are, to be biblically based, the following of the rules is super important. Not that the relationship isn't, they never really mention the relationship, it's always following the rules, not to the nth degree, but it almost seems that way.
Yeah.
So this is why this is so refreshing to me, because that's how I believe the relationship, and you look at it, not holistically, but kind of holistically.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if my friends doing the exact same study would come down to the same.
And it might be my perspective, I'm sure it is my perspective of it, because I have seen a legalistic approach to whether it's parenting or whatever it is. And if you're being legalistic without the relational component, it's just shallow and it's not life-giving.
But they say it's to be biblically based.
But then they forget the part of grace.
Yeah.
But they do the letter of the law rather than the meaning of the law so often.
No, I think they're trying to mean maybe it's just
Or
differences,
spirit of
and how Christians flesh out the Christianity.
Yeah.
That's just why I think there's different churches, because,
Right.
the basics are all the same, but just, maybe this,
The nuances,
the
yeah,
nuances, yeah. Yeah, I just have to have a lot of friends who, the nuances more this way, not more this way.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So I do have, if we want to do 10 more minutes.
Okay,
do prayer
we go
cards at
between 10 and 10:15ish is when we start prayer cards.
So I do have some
10 to
discussion
10 is fine.
questions,
Oh,
if you want to do
Yeah,
some
let's do that.
discussion questions. I didn't use my whiteboard at all, but it's such a long story, it's like hard to get through it all. But, what else do we have?
We're not going to do it yet, but.
So my thought was, to give you like 5 minutes, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Break you guys up into groups of pairs of 4.
Are these the same?
I think
You
it's the
can
same.
answer 2 questions each. So like, if Lori and Debbie want to do, what were you needing?
I'm gonna, I might just a little early.
If you two want to do questions 1 and 2, and then Linda and Nancy, you want to do 3 and 4,
Mhm.
and then Deb and, she got her phone
Mary.
call.
Oh, I don't know if she's coming back.
I think she might have talked to
I know she was waiting for a phone
And
call.
you're, I'll go see if she's still out there.
Well, Mary and Robin, if you guys want to do, what did I just do?
5 and 6.
Okay, 5, 6, and 7, because they're kind of short, so I'm receiving them.
Okay, hopefully it's about her dad. Okay, Miss Linda.
You want to join somebody?
We have 3 and 4 left. Yeah.
You want to come over here?
Well, that's
Do that 15 phrase to be
exactly, well, okay.
Yeah, so-
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
take some notes to my staff. How many should I leave?
What kind of effect does your decision to not?
Okay, so that's it?
Perfect.
You shouldn't have it at all.